Yo, here we are back at it again. We was checking out a Back to the Future, like a couple fan theories. That was a few videos ago. Definitely, eventually I'll be linking this type of stuff together so you guys can look, but right now it's not linked. All right, but that video it inspired me to go and watch it again, which is a really kick-ass movie. You guys, you gotta go watch Back to the Future 1, 2, and 3. Now I watched 1 and 2 last weekend. Fire! It was fire. It was a really good, two really good movies. Um, I highly recommend you guys go check it out. But that got me on the kick. Hey, yo, man, let's see what was going on, because I noticed a few things in part two from part one. It's like, yo, man, what's going on? So let's go ahead and jump into this video, explaining why it was some type of lawsuit that just shook up the whole film industry. We're about to jump into that. But before we do, remember to like and subscribe. Drop a comment. What was your favorite Back to the Future? Was it 1, 2, or 3? And let me know. Look, what part do you remember if you haven't seen it recently? What's like one of your favorite parts in your mind that you remember? Drop it in the comments. Caw-caw!
We all know that in the first Back to the Future film, George McFly is a great character. We always see Marty as the main character as he tries to get his parents together and get back to the future, but really the film is heavily focused on George and he's incredibly important to the story. When we're first introduced to him, he's this weak, easily bullied middle-aged man, and when Marty goes 30 years into the past to meet his 17-year-old father, he's soon to discover that his dad has always been the same as he was then. Over the course of the film, we see him grow and develop as a character, overcoming his fears and standing up for himself, until the very end where he beats up the bully and ends up with his future wife. Crispin Glover, who plays George McFly in Back to the Future, does an amazing job, and the success of the movie was sure to boost his career. But from then on, the story isn't that simple, because Crispin wasn't the biggest fan of some aspects of the film.
Just a quick tidbit. Just because George changes, that's not gonna change his neighborhood. Like, yo, if you live, because he didn't move. So, all right, I get that the house and the neighborhood, like, yo, your house can be clean. But if your neighborhood look like the slums, just because you get a little heart, that's not gonna change your neighborhood. Let's jump back in.
Film, leading to a big fight against the studio, eventually ending to a legal battle against the film's producers that changed the Hollywood film industry forever. This is that story. Now first let's just go back to the start and how this whole thing got started in the first place. Now Crispin Glover was only a young actor at the time Back to the Future was being cast, and to get a role in a big Steven Spielberg Universal film was very lucky. It might seem strange now, but it wasn't certain that Back to the Future was going to be the big hit that it turned out to be. There were many obstacles the producers had to overcome to get the film made. People didn't really have hope that the film was going to do that well. But in the end, the film was a massive success, making it the highest grossing film of 1985. Now apparently when the movie was being filmed, Crispin actually wasn't given the whole script. He probably would have just been given the scenes before shooting and not the whole script to begin with. Now, I'm sure this is not a personal thing or anything against him, because around this time, endings and information about the film's plot and details was being leaked, so I'm sure this didn't happen with Back to the Future. They wanted to make sure that nothing got out. But the ending to the film is actually the thing that Crispin had a problem with, because he didn't really have much time to speak out against it or raise his concerns, because he wasn't really given that part until close to filming, but he really didn't like the ending. As you know, by the end of the film, Marty gets back to the future, to a clean house, a well-respected family with good jobs, and rich. Glover had a problem with this. He didn't like the message, money buys happiness. So when it came time to doing part 2, the producers asked around to see who would be interested in coming back. Everyone was on board, except Glover. According to him, it was because he was still salty about the ending, therefore he wasn't too keen on coming back to do the 2 sequels. But the producers have a different story to what happened. According to Robert Zemeckis, Glover asked for as much money as Michael J. Fox for the film, saying that they should be paid on equal terms. Zemeckis did not grant him this much money and instead, according to Glover, giving him half as much money as Biff Actor would be getting paid. They could not agree on a reasonable contract, so Glover just ended up not returning at all. But now the producers were in a difficult situation because they had to try and figure out a way to write George out of the sequels. I'm pretty sure originally the film was going to be set in the 60s or something and had to do with George proposing to Lorraine and Marty being thrown in jail, but now this had to all be cut. Now, this whole story might have been scrapped for different reasoning, but it definitely had to do with Glover not wanting to return. But because George was such a big part of the first film, it would have been weird just not to include him at all. So they decided to recast the role, which is fine and really not a problem with. George is not the only role that had to be recast for part 2. The role of Jennifer, Marty's girlfriend, also had to be recast due to...
And that's crazy, y'all. I can barely tell that either one of those were recast. Like, it is crazy how they were recast, and I could barely tell.
Claudia Wells having to put her acting career on hold. So they did recast the role, but not in the traditional way. You see, they didn't want audiences to know that the role had been recast. They still wanted people to think that Glover was in the role. So when they're making Back to the Future, there are a few scenes where George is in his 40s, and to make Glover look that age, they use prosthetics and moldings of his face. Now for part 2, to trick audiences thinking that he was still in the role, they got the new actor, Jeffrey Wiseman, to put the prosthetics of Glover's face on him. So he was literally wearing Glover's face to work every day. Like, how creepy does his face mask look? Like, did no one on set just go, yeah, this just looks a bit wrong?
Oh man, that is crazy. I actually thought, just watching it back, I thought they used a green screen. I thought they used the original footage from the first one and just used a green screen. That's what it looks like when you're watching it. But man, that's crazy that they didn't use a green screen.
So, as you know, in Act 2, they travel to 2015, where we see an old George. Now, they put Jeffrey Wiseman in all the prosthetics and makeup, but when they were filming, you could kind of tell it was a different actor. But they didn't want audiences to realise that, so they just wrote in a back injury into the script and hung him upside down by this device, so you couldn't really tell, which just... For Act 2, where a lot of the film takes place, they just kill George off, making another problem for the two characters to resolve. And when we get to Act 3, they set the film where the end of the first film takes place. So they reused footage of Glover for a lot of these scenes, but when it came time to filming these scenes from different angles, that is not Glover. They purposely filmed from the back of him or from his side, or when he came close to the shot, they just blurred the background, so you couldn't really tell it was a different actor unless you really zoomed in. But let's get real, this was the late 80s, no one had the quality to do that. But now, when you do look close, you are not looking at Crispin Glover, but instead a much creepier looking version of his face on another actor. Now, when the film...
Side note, that would be a really good way to do the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. They just redid one on Netflix. This is the way to do it. You have a creepy face on top of another face. That's how you do it.
It did come out and it was all finished and Glover saw it. He was not happy that they used his likeness without permission. Like, did they think he would just be completely okay with that? Like, he had a problem with the ending. He's not going to be happy with this. And to make matters worse, he didn't even like the recast actor's performance, and he didn't want to be associated with that actor's poor performance, and didn't want people to think he acted in the film when he obviously didn't. But that's not the end of it. He didn't just let the producers know he wasn't happy, but he took the whole thing to court, and he won the case. Meaning that now there are rules in the Screen Actors Guild stating that you cannot use another actor's likeness without their consent in a film. Now, this whole thing hasn't even blown over yet after it being so many years. Glover is still dark about the whole thing and holds a grudge to Robert Zemeckis to this day. Now, since this whole thing has happened...
Dog, you gotta move on. Like, yo, come on, man. Like, there's actresses that got raped over parts. Alright? You didn't get as much as Michael J. Fox, or you're not as famous. Like, yo, come on. Like, let it go.
And many years have passed, Hollywood are now having new ways to bring actors into their films that might not be necessarily alive. So, is that okay? I mean, sometimes they do this to create a younger version of a character with the actor's permission, but is it okay to bring another actor back to life with CGI just for a film role? There's definitely some grey areas there that I don't think fall under this rule. It is an interesting question, like where does the line get drawn? I know this is a popular thing for filmmakers to do, but seriously, recasting is just such an easier option. Now, Glover has starred in other movies since, but nothing has come close to the success of Back to the Future. The legal battle definitely left a dent in his career, but it was a risk he was willing to take, and I gotta give him props to that. But Back to the Future still remains a classic today, despite all the craziness and trouble behind the scenes. Anyway, that is the end of the video. Make sure to comment down below what you think of this whole thing, and make sure to subscribe to the channel.
Yeah, definitely. Let's see, who is this? Film Friday. So Film Friday, definitely check them out. I'm gonna put the links below. That was interesting. And look, he changed the game. All right, he changed the game. And you can't just use people likenesses without paying them, which I don't think they did that before. But now they really not doing that. So, hey, there it is. Remember, it's cold out here. Bring it in.